See, we have seen the case of pure rotation, that is rotation over fixed axis. Now we are going to see another kind of motion, that is translation plus rotation. So we have studied translation, the chapter before the rigid body dynamics. We were only studying translation of the rigid body. When you study the translation of rigid body, you treat it as a particle, and we call the part of mechanics as particle dynamics, right? When you discuss only translation of rigid body, then you are treating the body as a particle, because when you are discussing translation can be described by Newton's law, F equal to mass into acceleration. And in this case, the translation of rigid body does not depend on point of application, so I treat the body as a particle. Then in the previous section, we discussed rotation on fixed axis, where we described the rotation about fixed axis by this equation. Now we are into a general case, a case where we have translation and rotation both. Like in the last section, we had a case of pulley which is fixed to the axle and free to rotate about this, or we had this kind of pulley where the pulley was moving in this direction, or we had a kind of disc on which the man was moving and the disc was free to move about this axis or say in opposite direction. But now we are going to see a case where the rigid body is translating as well as rotating. Like say if I have a sphere on the floor and I hit the sphere at this point, then what will happen? It will translate and simultaneously it's going to rotate. It is going to translate and simultaneously it is going to rotate as well. Now in this case, we have to study how this V and omega is varying, and this is center of mass, so I'll call it VCM, I'll call it omega. Now in this case, this is a very important case, and now we have, if I ask you what is the velocity of this point, if the velocity of center of mass is VCM and the angular velocity of the rigid body about the axis passing through center of mass is omega, then if I pick any arbitrary point over here and I ask you what is the velocity at this point, what will you say? See, a rigid body as such consists of infinitely many particles. It consists of infinitely many particles. Rigid body consists of infinitely many particles, so that is a system of particles, you can say. So but these infinitely many particles are not free from each other. They are not free from each other. They are constrained to each other. They are so highly constrained that distance between any two particles you pick on the rigid body is not going to change during motion. So it's a highly constrained system of particles. Particles are constrained to each other. Particles, the motion of one particle is not independent of the other particle. So the most beautiful thing about rigid body is, if I know the velocity of center of mass and the angular velocity of the rigid body about an axis passing through center of mass, then any particle which is at a vector, you can represent this by a vector r. I can represent any particle on the rigid body which is represented by a position vector r from the center of mass. I can express that velocity of that particle is going to be VCM into omega cross r. What does it mean? It means that velocity of any point of the rigid body is superposition of the velocity when the rigid body undergoes a pure translation, that is VCM, and the velocity which the point P has when the body undergoes pure rotation. Omega cross I is the velocity of point P when this rigid body undergoes a pure rotation about an axis passing through center of mass. If suppose there is no rotation and body is only translating, the velocity is VCM. Velocity at every point is VCM. And if suppose the axis is fixed, the axis is not moving, it's not translating. Suppose you have this sphere undergoing a pure rotation, then velocity at any point is given by omega cross r, and when it undergoes pure translation, it undergoes translation plus rotation, then the velocity of any point is superposition of the velocity when it has during pure translation and the velocity which it has when it undergoes a pure rotation. It's just superposition. So that gives a very good approach of understanding the motion of rigid body, right? So I can write a line over here. I write the motion of rigid body, or a general motion. This is translation plus rotation is going to be a general motion. A general motion means translation plus rotation of a rigid body can be seen as, or can be visualized as, superposition of pure translation of center of mass and pure rotation of rigid body about an axis passing through center of mass. A general motion of rigid body can be seen as superposition of pure translation of center of mass and pure rotation of rigid body about an axis passing through center of mass. This is something which we will be making use of in the whole chapter, in the rest of the chapter, right? It will help us to get the velocity of any point. It will also help us to get kinetic energy. This line will also help us to get angular momentum of the rigid body when it undergoes translation plus rotation. To explain this line more, I'll take a case of a rigid body when it undergoes a pure translation and a case of rigid body when it undergoes pure rotation, and then I'll show you the motion of different points of the rigid body when it undergoes translation plus rotation. So I'll draw a figure for you. Suppose this is a sphere. This is a sphere. Now this is undergoing a pure translation. This undergoes a pure translation. In this case, this is center of mass. So what's the velocity of center of mass? This is going to be the velocity of center of mass. This is going to be our VCM. Right. Now, if it undergoes pure translation, there is no rotation involved. Suppose this is a sphere. It is undergoing a pure translation, right? Or say it is a wheel, and wheel is undergoing a pure translation, means it is just slipping over the surface. It's not undergoing any rotation, it's just slipping over the surface. When you have this, then every point on the wheel is going to move with the same velocity, VCM. Every point on the wheel is going to move with the same velocity, VCM. Like if I pick any point over here, this is also going to move with the same velocity, that is VCM, right? That's also going to move with the same velocity, VCM. I'll draw. The velocity at the highest point is also going to be VCM. Velocity at any point below the center is also going to be VCM. Velocity at the bottom, the point of contact, is also going to be VCM. It's going to be same velocity. These vectors have to be of same you can say length, because every point is having the velocity VCM, right? If I pick a point over here, that's also going to have the same velocity VCM. If I pick a point over here, that's also going to be having same velocity as the VCM, or I should draw a bigger one. And if I pick a point, say on a general point over here, that's also going to produce VCM. So all the velocities, all these velocities are same. VCM. This is also, every point is going to have the same velocity since the body is undergoing pure translation. Since the body undergoes a pure translation, every point on the rigid body is going to have the same velocity, right? Now suppose the same body undergoes a pure rotation, rotation over the fixed axis. The axis passing through the center of mass is fixed and the body is undergoing just pure rotation. Let's mark this point, call it say O. This point is point of contact, call it P. This is say A, B, C, and say this is D, this is F, and say this is G. The other points. I'll see the velocity of the same set of points. I've taken a different set of points. I can take even more points. I'll show you the velocity of same set of points when it undergoes a pure rotation. Let's draw that figure. Suppose the same rigid body is undergoing a pure rotation. Say it's undergoing rotation omega, right? It is omega. So the direction of omega, if you curl your fingers of right hand in this sense, in what direction thumb is pointing out? Thumb is going out in inward direction, right? Velocity at any point, this is a case of pure rotation. This is a case of pure rotation. Velocity at any point is given by V equals to omega cross R. So I can use this also to get the velocity at any point, or I'll tell you the simple way also. So if I use this, omega lies in inward direction. If I curl my fingers in the direction of omega, if you curl your fingers of right hand in the direction of omega, thumb goes inward. So omega, direction of omega lies inward. And if I want to find the velocity at this point, then say point B, then the vector which joins omega to B is going to be this R vector. So this is your R vector. Omega goes inward. So omega cross R will be, first of all, you put the fingers of your right hand in direction of omega and then curl the fingers towards R. Put the fingers of right hand in the direction of omega and then curl your fingers towards R. Then thumb is going to give you direction of omega cross R. So if I put my fingers like this and curl it towards R, the thumb is going towards right. Thumb goes towards right. If I put my fingers in the direction of omega and curl it towards R, the thumb goes in this direction. So the direction of velocity at point B is going to be this. This is going to be the direction. Say this is going to be the direction, and omega and R is perpendicular. So it will be just omega R, the magnitude of velocity is going to be omega R, not vector sign. This is magnitude of velocity is omega R towards right. So I'll say this is V, right? Magnitude of velocity. And suppose the height is say, this height is say h, then this velocity is going to be omega h. Moreover, I don't have to resort to this kind of method. What I can see is when it undergoes a pure rotation, every point on the rigid body is undergoing a circular motion. So this point B will undergo a circular motion of radius h, right? This point B, when the whole rigid body is undergoing a pure rotation, every point on the rigid body will undergo a kind of circular motion about this axis, about this point. So when it undergoes circular motion, the velocity will be only tangential and it will be omega r, that is omega h. Radius is h, b is at distance of h from the axis, so the velocity will be omega h. Here the velocity is going to be omega r. Here the velocity is going to be simply omega r. At this point the velocity is going to be in backward direction it will start from here, it will go backward, that is omega h. This point is moving like this, right? So this will be omega h, and at this point again the velocity will be omega r in backward direction. It is omega r, and at this point is going to be upward, and over here is going to be down, that is omega r again, and at point G this is again omega r. So these are the velocities when the body undergoes a pure rotation. These are the corresponding velocity when the same body is undergoing a pure rotation. Getting a point? So these are the velocities when it undergoes a pure rotation about the axis passing through center of mass with the angular velocity omega. Now if the same body undergoes translation plus rotation, the same body undergoes translation plus rotation, what will happen? Then in that case the velocity of these points will be just superposition of these two velocities. So let me draw that case, translation plus rotation. Now we are seeing the case of translation plus rotation. We will see the case of translation plus rotation. So velocity at any point will be given by VCM plus omega cross r. VCM plus omega cross r. Okay. So in this case the velocity at any point, see in this case velocity of VCM was 0. So velocity of O is going to be VCM plus 0. So that's going to be VCM only over here. The velocity will be VCM at this point. Over here, see this point B, the velocity was VCM when it was undergoing pure translation, and omega h when it undergoes pure rotation. So the velocity when it undergoes both translation plus rotation is going to be VCM plus omega h. At point A, the velocity when it was undergoing pure rotation it was VCM, and velocity when it undergoes pure rotation is omega r, so it will be just added up like this. At point C, the velocity when it undergoes pure translation is VCM towards right, and the velocity when it undergoes pure rotation is omega s towards left. So net velocity when it undergoes both translation plus rotation is going to be VCM minus omega h, and in this case the velocity at point P. This is very important point which we are going to discuss ahead, that is VCM minus omega r. And in this case, the velocity when it undergoes pure translation, let me do it with green pen, it was VCM in this direction and omega r in this direction. So in that case, when it undergoes both, the velocity is going to be the superposition of these two. So this is going to be this. Same thing is over here. Similar thing we'll have over here. It's at F. The velocity was VCM in this direction when it was doing pure translation, and omega r in this direction when it was doing pure rotation, and when it undergoes both, the velocity will be somewhat superposition of these two. So that's going to be again VCM square plus omega square r square. And at G, it's a very general point. It's a very general point. It's going to be the velocity was VCM when it undergoes pure translation, velocity VCM in this direction. I should write a bigger line. It was VCM in this direction and omega r in this direction. So now when it undergoes pure translation, rotation, translation plus rotation, the velocity is going to be, this is the resultant. And if suppose this is, if suppose this is say point G, say the angle which point G makes with say with vertical, say it is theta, then in this case this angle will also be theta. You can see it from geometry. This is VCM, this is omega. So the net velocity is going to be VCM square plus omega square r square and twice of VCM into omega r. This is cos theta. Now you can see for this point I can put this theta 0 and velocity will be VCM plus omega r, and as I move down the velocity go on falling, and at this point theta is 90, so it is VCM square plus omega square r square under root. At this point I can put theta equals to pi, and then this will give you VCM minus omega r. And similarly I can find the velocity at any point on the periphery. So this is how the velocity of the rigid body can be found, by just superposing the velocity when it undergoes pure translation and the velocity when it undergoes pure rotation. So I can say that this is pure translation plus pure rotation equals to translation plus rotation. So I hope it becomes clear to you why I am saying that the velocity at any point, or the motion, the general motion, that is translation plus rotation, can be seen as superposition of pure translation off center mass plus pure rotation about an axis passing through center of mass, right? About an axis passing through center of mass. So they just add up to translation plus rotation, right? They add up to translation plus rotation. Now in next lecture I'll be discussing about a very special kind of translation plus rotation, that is rolling. So please remember this picture, right? We'll come to